Something I've come to learn in my tender year of 23 is that you can always tell the lasting time factor of a console not only by its durability, but by the games created for it. There were a lot of really great games on the Super Nintendo, maybe more so than its predecessor. I mean, I'm not saying this out of personal opinion, because it's true. Ask anyone who owned a Super Nintendo. The good to bad ratio of games was ridiculously high, probably 9 out of 10. Something I didn't see again until the Sony PlayStation made an appearance in 1996. Just like in the NES days, Capcom and Konami were ready at the flanks, but this time backing up the rear was Squaresoft. Squaresoft tried to make a name for itself back in the 80s, but failed miserably with a handful of lackluster titles, and really only a few successes like the Rad Racer series and Final Fantasy. But this time around, Squaresoft was ready to take on anything. And although there were still annoying things about its games, the company easily made up for it on the Super Nintendo. They hit a goldmine with Final Fantasy, and throughout the 16-bit era stayed with what worked for them best, bringing us absolute classics such as Secret of Mana, Final Fantasy II, the original Breath of Fire even though Capcom developed it, and what is known throughout the gaming culture as the Masterpiece Trilogy, Super Mario RPG, Final Fantasy III, and none other than Chrono Trigger. A lot of people around my age say that they have fond memories of their NESs, and say that it's their favorite of the retro system. But you know, while the Nintendo Entertainment System was also the first console I ever owned, most of my warm fuzzy memories settle on the Super NES. Man, what a great system! I still remember when I opened it up on Christmas morning in 1992. Instead of most kids who got a SNES with Super Mario World included, mine was packed in with Mario Paint. Alongside that, my brother gave me a few of his old games. As a kid, it was amazing coming off of Super Mario Bros. 3, which I just got for my birthday that past April, and onto Super Mario World. Everything about that game just blew me away. Rotating walls, giant bullet bills, and Goombas that look kinda 3D in comparison to their NES counterparts. As a 6-year-old kid, it was such a surreal feeling. A few days after Christmas that year, my dad took me to a place in the neighboring town. It was kinda like a hawk shop, but as I remember, it was strictly for media. I don't ever remember there being movies, but there were video games all over the place. You'd walk in, and there were these glass cases all lined up beside each other, filled to the brim with loose games. NES, Super NES, Genesis, Game Boy, Game Gear, you name it. You name it, they had it. And then lined up along the walls were shelves upon shelves of even more games, except they were CIB. And then you turn around again and wha-bam! A whole area lined up with TVs and consoles, so you could try out the games before you bought them. Man, that place was great. And for a store, it had the weirdest name. The Green Door. I mean, the Green Door? What is that? But it was that fateful day that I bought a video game for the very first time with my own money. Super Ghouls and Ghosts. And from that point on, figuratively speaking, a sacred trinity was born. Myself, my consoles, and that store. It was like that up until the Green Door finally swung shut, a good 4 or 5 years later. The Super NES even experimented with going fully 3D, using something called the Super Effects chip a few years into the console's life cycle. Only a handful of games used this chip, like Stunt Race FX and Star Fox, and though those particular games haven't aged as well as other Super NES games have, it was still an interesting idea to try out. And then ID and Williams Entertainment announced they were going to port Doom onto the Super NES using the Super Effects chip. Doom? You mean that gargantuan PC DOS game? You can't do that, that's impossible. Doom? On a Super NES? No way! Yet somehow they did it. The game lost a lot of its visual flair, but it is an even better port than the 32X, which came out later on. And strangely enough, I prefer Doom's soundtrack on the Super NES than I do its PC counterpart. To me, what was so enthralling about Doom on the Super Nintendo was the cartridge. It was red. The only other red card on the SNES was Maximum Carnage, and I hated that game. As a kid, I was fairly impressionable, so when I opened up that box and saw a red Doom card, I found myself inspired to try and make my other games colored as well. As seen by my black Street Fighter II card, and a greenish-blue earthworm gym cart. Though it doesn't really show up too well on camera, games like Super Mario RPG and Secret of Mana, they even fell victim to Crayola. How would I have known that these games would eventually become collector's items? How would any kid know? Aw, frig, man, Super Nintendo, you rule! Secret of Mana, Doom, Super Mario World, aw man, you can't get any better than this! At least, that's what I thought, until I saw this commercial one Saturday morning.
It's Super Game Boy from Nintendo. Play your Game Boy games on the Super NES in living color. Even choose your own color combinations. Play all 350 Game Boy games. How does that strike you? Super Game Boy for the Super NES. Game Boy games in color, intense.
At the time, I thought I died and went to heaven. When that thing came out, my dad rented it in Wario Land, and for that entire weekend, I refused to come out of my bedroom. And lo and behold, that Christmas, both the Super Game Boy and Wario Land were under the tree. Actually, now that I think about it, although I had a pretty good, healthy relationship with the Green Door, I didn't have nearly as many games as a lot of people I went to school with. To be honest, I rented games more than actually bought them. And I think my parents used our local video store as a tool to get an idea of games I liked and what to get me for birthdays and Christmas. Hey Dad, can we rent Earthworm Jim? BAM! Wow Santa, how did you know I like this game? Aw man, Yoshi's Island is so awesome compared to the first. Holy crap, Santa! Someone's on the ball! And then there was that one year where Santa must have been freaking drunk out of his mind because for some forsaken reason I got 2 copies of Wario's Woods. Anyway, I just wanted to pay tribute to what I think is one of the greatest consoles of all time. This video didn't really take a whole lot of thought to make. It was just, I was sitting here and it was like, you know what, Super Nintendo's wicked. I think I'm gonna do a video about it. The 90s were what a lot of us game hobbyists call the golden age of video games. Those of us who grew up in the aftermath of the 80s glory, even though we were shrugged off, we at least did something that Ferris Bueller, Teddy Ruxpin, and CV Nix couldn't for once. We played with power. Superpower.